All right, guys, we are going to do Chapter 5 of Sparrow Hawk Red. So if you remember from Chapter 4, Ricky had just crossed the border into Mexico. And his plan is to go steal a plane. Crazy. The border town of Domingo hummed with activity. People crowded along the sidewalks, whistling, shouting, and laughing. Cars raced down the narrow streets, honking for no apparent reason. Ricky liked the commotion of Mexican border towns. Peppered meat sizzled at corner taco stands. Accordions, trumpets, and guitars filled the air with ranchera music. Ricky turned to watch a car drive by, the blaring loudspeaker on its roof advertising specials of the day for a local grocery store. Here, every day seemed like a carnival. Ahead was the marketplace. Ricky loved to rummage through the colorful stands and barter for things. In Mexico, if you paid the price asked, they were disappointed. The merchants loved to dicker and haggle over every peso as if it were their last drop of blood. Ricky enjoyed this. Why couldn't the same thing happen back home? Why not have fun doing ordinary things? Today there was no time to stop. Ricky passed by the market, hiking instead toward the highway south of town. On the way, he passed by a car wash. Not a real car wash, just an old man sitting beside 4 garden hoses, hoping to collect some money. A family with 9 children pulled up in an old car. Each child jumped out, grasping a small patch of rag. Ricky stopped and watched. As the father sprayed the hose at the car, his wife and herd of children scrubbed furiously. The man made no effort to avoid spraying his family, and soon they were all drenched. Ricky half-emptied them. The heat made the cold water look inviting. When they finished, their dripping family piled back into their car and left. Ricky kept walking. After reaching the highway, he waited and waited. An hour passed before a bus rumbled by, headed south to Mariposa. Ricky waved it down the way Mexicans did. Calling the rattling pile of tin a bus was like calling an outhouse a castle. In fact, the Spanish name Camion Polero, meaning chicken truck, was more accurate. The Camion Polero swayed to a dusty stop on the shoulder. Its front door stood open. People and their belongings hung out the windows. At the front, a heavy lady reclined sideways, filling a whole seat. A naked baby sat on her lap, crying with intense hiccuping screams. "Doce mil pesos," said the driver, asking for 12,000 pesos. He watched curiously as Ricky fumbled with the roll of bills. After peeling off the exact amount, Ricky squeezed past the big lady and worked his way down the aisle. Several passengers held wire cages on their laps. Inside were frightened chickens and rabbits. All seats were filled, so Ricky remained standing. Also standing were 2 women who were balanced small bundles on their heads. One of the ladies had no teeth. She turned to look at Ricky with a gummy, curious smile. The bus lurched forward, gears grinding. Dry, suffocating dust churned up from the gravel shoulder. No one seemed to mind. Ricky coughed as the bus rattled and wound down the road and across the Sonora desert. Lowering his head, he glanced out the window. The desert here was different from back home. Clumps of bare grass poked up from the sea of golden grama grass. Only a few Oregon and saguaro cactus stood alone on the flats. A light wind rolled tumbleweed down the ditch, bouncing it lazily. Most people imagined a desert differently from this. Ricky's cousins from Chicago had visited last summer expecting sand dunes and camels. Instead, they found miles of thin grass and cactus. In every direction, groups of mountains rimmed the horizon like islands in the sky. Scrub oak and dusty green mesquite filled the open spaces. In the high country, Ricky had seen mountain lions, bears, even bighorn sheep. Down here, he mostly saw smaller critters like jackrabbits, skunks, ground squirrels, and pack rats. Right now, he could see a column of buzzards to the south, circling lower and lower, probably lured down by a sick or dying animal. Ricky shifted his balance back and forth to rest his feet. When seats became vacant, he motioned for the standing ladies to sit down. Mom would have been real big on being polite. Passengers whistled and hooted at his chivalry, watching him with curiosity. Ricky disliked this about his life. North of the border, his toast-colored skin often got him teased. Here, his upbringing and habits made him a stranger. He felt caught between 2 worlds. Clinging to his gym bag, he wrinkled his nose. Fresh fruits and peppers from the market did little to cover up the smell of the animals, sweaty bodies, and wet diapers. Mixed with dust, the air became suffocating. The 50-mile trip to Mariposa lasted all morning. Ricky's legs grew tired of standing. The bus stopped often, allowing passengers to squirm off or squeeze on. A long bell cord extended back through the rings above the windows on both sides of the bus. When people wanted to stop, they pulled the cord. Ricky wondered how the bus driver could hear the bell above the deafening clamor. On the horizon, the whitewashed and red-tiled adobe buildings of Mariposa appeared, shimmering in the heat waves and growing larger. Ricky had been through Mariposa before and recognized the flood tunnel crossing under the highway a mile out from town. The big culvert would make a good place to change clothes. He quickly pulled the cord. The bus brakes screeched as he gripped his way up the aisle. "Where does the brown gringo live, with the rabbits and lizards?" a young man joked in Spanish. "Maybe he's lost," murmured an older lady. It irked Ricky that they talked openly about him. He wished he didn't know Spanish, but Benito insisted on speaking it at home for weeks at a time to make sure he didn't get rusty, so he wouldn't forget his heritage. After those long periods, Ricky actually found himself thinking in Spanish. He felt betrayed by his own mind. People watched curiously as he stepped from the bus. Who could blame them? After all, why was a well-dressed American boy getting off the bus a mile from town on the open desert? As the bus pulled away, passengers eyed him through the billowing exhaust. Ricky looked down and pretended to walk nonchalantly across the shoulder. When he reached the large culvert, he dropped into the ditch. Heavy silt covered the floor of the long tunnel. The ground was wrinkled with bone-dry cracks, although a chubasco could change that real quick. Chubascos were flash storms. Their black, billowing clouds rolled in unexpectedly, shaking the ground with thunder and lightning. In minutes, sheets of drenching rain dumped from the sky, flooding desert areas. Often people died when the sudden gully-washing walls of water cascaded down the stony river bottoms. A stray cat shot out of the culvert. It held a scorpion in its mouth. Ricky jumped sideways. The scorpion's tail flicked back and forth, jabbing into the cat's cheek. She paid little notice as she scampered into the dry grass. A scorpion sting never seemed to harm a cat the way it did a person. Ricky remembered being stung once. For 2 days his foot swelled and he burned with fever. Mom sat holding his hand and singing to him softly. Today there would be no one to care for him or sing to him. He squinted into the culvert looking for other critters. Shade was a popular space in the desert. It looked empty. Ricky made sure no cars were coming, then ducked into the darkened chest-high tunnel. He had to stoop to keep from hitting his head. Awkwardly, he peeled off his good clothes. Crouching naked, he pulled the ragged clothes from the gym bag and wrestled them on. Last, he slipped the old tennis shoes over his bare feet. Rateros seldom wore shoes, and surely not socks. For all the effort, Ricky wondered if he looked much like a ratero. He didn't feel like one. Deliberately, he spread his belongings on the ground. Only 45,000 pesos were left, about $15. He wadded the bills and stuffed them into his pocket, along with the jackknife and the ID card. His good clothes fitted into the small gym bag. If the airplane wasn't at the Camacho Ranch, it would be good to have something to wear back across the border. Ricky grabbed a handful of dirt and dusted his jeans and shoes. Then, eyes and mouth shut tightly, he rubbed several handfuls on his face and into his hair. That helped, but not enough. His neatly trimmed hair needed more than messing up. On the highway, oil stains showed where cars or camiones peleros had broken down, and they often did, especially the chicken trucks. Ricky smeared his fingers across a patch of rubbed the greasy filth into his hair, smudging some on his cheeks and clothes. Ooh, what if his mom saw him like this? He tried talking to her. "How do I look, Mama?" he asked, stepping out of the culvert. At times like this, his mother seemed so real. He imagined her looking down at him, studying him head to foot. "You surely do look a mess," she said, smiling. "Do you think I can steal the airplane dressed like this, Mama?" he asked. Closing his eyes helped to get her to answer. "Is this what you're planning?" she said. "Yep, they'll think I'm a ratero. They won't know if I'm a pilot." "Why are you saving your good clothes and your ID card?" "In case I steal the plane." "I can't steal the plane," Ricky blurted, looking up. "Then I can still get home." He stooped down and started digging with his hands in the dirt to bury the gym bag. "Looks to me like you're keeping a foot on first base while you try to steal second," she said. "This isn't baseball," Ricky said, irritated. He imagined his mother shaking her head patiently. "You either plan to succeed or you plan to fail," she said quietly. "If you're planning to fail, then go back. Stay on first base." Her voice became a whisper. "That would be safer." Ricky ignored her and kept digging until he had a hole big enough for the gym bag. Then he stopped. Would this really make him quit if the going got rough? He wiped his hands on his pants and looked up. Could Mom be right? Maybe this was like waffling a loop. It wouldn't actually make him fail. Trembling as if a small quake shook under him, he stood and kicked dirt back into the hole. The picture flashed into his mind of Mom hugging him. The mud from pig rustling hadn't mattered to her. It could have been a manure, and she'd still have hugged him. Quietly he spoke, I don't plan on failing, Mama. Picking up the bag, he started throwing his good clothes out along the highway. In no time they'd be picked up. With each piece, the distance home grew greater and greater. One last fling sent the gym bag spinning out into the golden grandma grass. He felt good, but still there were things that would make him fail. He pulled out his ID card and ripped it up. Oof, the jackknife and money he would keep. He might need that for stealing the airplane. Still, he knew the one thing that was anchoring his foot to first base. He pulled out his jackknife and opened it. For a moment, the situation rubbed him funny. What in the world was he doing on a school day here in the desert, 50 miles south of the border, with ragged clothes on and a knife opened in his hand? He laughed, but he felt like crying. He spit to keep back his tears and grabbed a handful of hair. No Ratero would have hair like this. Afraid his courage might fade, Ricky chopped and cut frantically. Handful after handful fell to the ground. Finally, all the long hair had been hacked short. No longer could he walk freely back through the border check station. His foot was off first base. Nobody would recognize him. Even if that was what he had wanted, the thought made him miserable and lonely. He'd thrown away his pride. Another thought bothered him. Who was he now? An American? A Ratero? Deep down, was he really a quitter? Ricky returned the jackknife to his pocket and started walking toward Mariposa. Against the ditch bank, his shadow looked strange. He kicked dirt at it. Still, it stayed beside him. Finally, Ricky spit at the shadow and turned his head away from it. That is the end of chapter 5. See you guys.